The rumor is that this hike has the best fall color views in all of Algonquin Park.
This guy doesn't realize it yet, but he barely comes home with even one good photo from this trip. And that's what makes this video worth making, because sometimes the best lessons in photography are from the photos that almost worked. So in this video, I'll show you what went wrong with this photo shoot, what raw files I took away, and how I was able to turn them all into something that I'm actually kind of proud of.
But they only give away a few passes per day, and I really don't see any photos from here. And I wonder if that's because this is a beautiful place, but not a photogenic place. And today I'm going to find out.
For those who are interested, this is Booth's Rock Trail along the Highway 60 corridor in Algonquin Park, and we have come during one of the busiest weekends of the entire year with the promise of gorgeous fall colors.
I think we're about halfway. Better be halfway. I think we are both, as is everybody else on the trail, pretty gassed. It's quite steep in parts going up the back of this thing, so at this point it better be worth it.
This location has more problems than being very busy today, because as you can see, nearly every wide-angle shot that I might take is interrupted by a tree or a bush that they're hard to isolate out. So I popped on my 50 to 400 millimeter and was able to find one composition that I liked, but the conditions were very tough.
Well, it's really busy. Fortunately, the sky is blue right above me, but there's a haze on the horizon, so it's kind of like, I don't know, it's screwing with the photos a little bit. The verdict is absolutely beautiful, not at all photogenic. There's just so much stuff in the way everywhere.
Now I'm back in the studio a week later and I've already edited this photo. Actually, I saved this photo. What I want to show you is my raw to final edit conversion, what techniques and tools that I used, and how I dealt with some of the things in the photo that made me want to delete it.
So I'm in Lightroom and I've got a few files and I want to talk about what I had here. So on the day of, I actually decided to do an HDR bracket, and I'm not 100% sure that I needed that, but sometimes when the color conditions are, I don't know, they're like very flat, I like to do an HDR image so that I can really bring quite a lot of color and color contrast out of the image. Again, I think that's optional, but that's what I decided to do. Either way, merging those together in Lightroom, I resulted with this photo here. So let's just go into develop and take a look at it, which to me, again, looks very flat. The colors are not very rich. I think I probably would have rejected this right off the bat. And let me tell you why I would have done that. I really dislike this sky. I don't know what color this is, but it's definitely like some kind of gray, blue, awful. But it's got no definition whatsoever except for this spot on my sensor. And it just, I don't know, it's very boring. I'm probably going to cut out the entire thing in this edit is what I was thinking. I think also this side over here is very, very well lit and bright, and it draws a lot of attention, which is a problem because it's right near the edge of the frame. But I do like it. I like that it sort of, gives a little bit more of a story, and definitely this curve here, while subtle, definitely points back to the main subject, which is this kind of one tree right here. In all that's going on, just this one tree. The other part is these little white spots. These are actually cars that are parked in the parking lot, because that is where the parking lot for this hike actually is. So I don't like that. And then the foreground is a little too bright, so I'll probably darken that. And then this area over here is very troublesome because there's some trees that have sort of dropped their leaves already, but it's just this big spot. And well, it's not white. It's got this like kind of brighter gray color to it. So again, draws the eye kind of away from this main subject, which I don't really want to do. In my editing, I actually start with one tool nearly always, which is the contrast slider. And I don't do that because I'm trying to add a lot of contrast to the photo. I do this because it's an editing aid, and I'll show you what I mean. When I begin to add a lot of contrast to this, you can see that the colors start to separate quite a lot. So I'm going to add quite a lot of color contrast there. And then this will really show up when I start adding a little bit of exposure. It's like the contrast, but the saturation just really, really drives way up. And I just do this so that my eye can become acclimated to what I actually have in there, right? So I can see that, like, this spot over here actually has quite a lot of color, even though I didn't like it previously. This spot is really quite bright. There's a lot of brightness going on down here in this foreground that I don't really like. But there's like a little bit of layering going on between the foreground and the background, which is good. I can accentuate that. But again, it's a visual aid to use in editing, and I always intend to dial this back. And I will in the final edit. Speaking of which, this is the final edit of this photo, and I would say it's 99% of the way there to what I like. You can see that I've cropped out almost all of the sky, and I've definitely sort of darkened this area here and got rid of a little of the confusing sort of white and gray colors in here. Like, it just looks a little muted, and I've definitely darkened the foreground to get rid of a little bit of that, that bright foreground that was there previously. I've also used a little bit of color and sort of lines to add more separation between the foreground and the background. And I've also used that same tool to bring more attention to this tree here, this sort of main tiny little subject living in this forest. Now, I've done a lot of this using a couple of different coloring tools, but mostly masking. So I did make some changes in the calibration. You can see I've sort of changed the hue of both the red, the green, and the blue primary. Again, just to bring the colors a little bit more in tune with what I liked to see on that day. And then I've accentuated that even more with the color mixer, where I've added a little bit of saturation to some of the colors and some luminance to, I've removed or added some luminance to some of the other colors in order to really accentuate the reds, the oranges, and the yellows of that day. One of the things that I've done in here is removed a bunch of the luminance from the green colors that you're going to find down here in the bottom. Well, it's global, but definitely down here in the bottom, which helps just darken that foreground, adds a little bit of vignette to it, but also just sort of like removes that distracting element of this bright foreground from the equation. And I can just do that using the luminance in the color mixer. As I said, a lot of this edit is actually done with a lot of masking. This is more masks than I typically have, but I'll go through exactly what each one of them is doing. So after sort of cropping, I immediately dealt with this sky just by removing a lot of the sort of highlights and bring that gray color back down to a bit of a blue. I think I've added, a little bit more blue sort of temperature, and definitely haven't really changed quite a lot after that. I also did a little bit of darkening of this foreground just by removing the exposure a little bit. This doesn't deal with this left side here, but just removing this a little bit adds a vignette and helps push the viewer's eye towards the brighter parts of the scene. I also decided that one of the things that I was going to do was really just call out this middle piece here, this part in the center that, I think was getting a lot of light sort of coming in from one side, and I really wanted to sort of show that off. So I made a mask, radial mask, just to sort of cover that entire area. And then all that's done in this mask is just to bring it up, this exposure up, just by a slight little bit, 0.1, in order to just bring a little bit more brightness to that area. And then as I was darkening the foreground, lightening the midground, I wanted to change the background just a little bit. So there's only a little bit of stuff that I've done with this, but removed a little bit of exposure, removed a bit of contrast to really give that atmospheric look of the sort of depth by adding a little bit more haze, removing that contrast. And then I dehaze this a little bit so that, it sort of, I think it adds back a little bit of this contrast, but it sort of takes a little bit out of the definition of that color contrast that's in that. Again, really just to squeeze the viewer's eye onto this centerpiece. I also then accentuated the light that was coming down from the sun here. And really, I'm just trying to target the beach and the trees in the beginning, but show that the sun is really shining on that area. And so it adds just a little bit of touch. If I remove this, you can see that it doesn't really do a lot. Let me add it back and see. Just sort of adds a little bit of glow just on that beach in that area, and just adds, I don't know, it's subtle, something subtle. I then also decided to sort of deal with this area over here. And if I delete this mask, you can see what this has actually done, which is right now without this mask, there's quite a lot of sun. There's a lot of light in there. And that's fine, but it's going to draw attention to the right side, which is not really where I want it. So if I put that mask back, what happens is it just darkens it. All I'm doing is just darkening it just a little bit, enough that, let me just pull this mask up, enough that the exposure is down, the highlights are down, so it just removes a little bit of the distracting bright color from there. Moving on, I also masked the tree and just sort of removed a little bit of the shadows and blacks from here. You got to be very careful when doing this type of thing because it can leave this little halo effect, and indeed it has actually done that here. But I find once you zoom out, it's not very visible, and you wouldn't really know unless you were looking very, very closely. So really it's just to lighten it up a little bit, remove some of the shadow, lighten it up a little bit, and just bring a little bit more attention to it. Okay, then I also dealt with this area here. So what I did in here if I delete this, you can sort of see it's subtle because I've also done some other edits to this. But if I put this back, what you can see is there's a bit of contrast that's added. And through that, I've actually brought out the colors and I've sort of darkened this. You can see there's like a little bit of a difference between this gray and this gray here. And I just really wanted to remove it to get rid of a little bit of the distraction from it. So the way that I did that is just to add a little bit of contrast, add a little bit of clarity, add a little dehaze. Like it was just screwing around with a couple of settings until the visual distraction kind of got removed. I then also did some like dodge burning, kind of just painting in a little bit of additional texture, just to, again, like accentuate this by putting a little bit of micro contrast on the pixels and giving them just a little bit more pop compared to the rest of the photo. And then one of the things that I usually do at the end is I add a vignette, but actually because I had added, some sun from this side, I can't just add a global vignette. So I kind of add a two-sided vignette. And I did this by masking out the sort of bottom here and removing a bit of the exposure, masking out the right side, and again, removing a bit of exposure to whatever my liking was at that time. And then finally, I sort of added back a little bit of brightness by removing the shadows and lowering the blacks a little bit. Let me show you what this looks like without this mask. It's sort of bright, but there's a bit of darkness there. And because I've got this sort of big gradient over here that sort of brings back some of the lightness, I just wanted to like bring this back and darken it down, but add a little bit more definition back to it. Then finally doing basically the same thing in the sky, but really this is to create a line of separation between these two parts of the hill in order to just, again, add a little bit more atmosphere. So this is lowering the contrast and adding a little bit negative dehaze to sort of, again, bring more brightness into that area, but really just kind of haze it up. So what I've ended up with is a photo that I think accurately represents the beauty of this Spruce Rock Trail. But if you compare this to the photo that I actually got that I think looks quite lifeless, dark, there's a lot of grays in here. And even if you take the exposure up a little bit, I think it's good, but it's just, I don't know, it's so bright. The conditions are not particularly great. If I go over to my edit, yes, I've changed quite a lot about this photo, but to me, it still looks very, very natural. And I think probably if I didn't have the editing skill that I have, I probably would have thrown this away. And because I was able to edit it, it's now something that I think I saved. Anyways, thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.